Hi everyone, welcome to Marketing Responsibly, Navigating the COVID Challenge with Mobile. I'd like to start off by thanking you all for joining us today. My name is Srishna. I'm the Integrated Marketing Manager for Asia Pacific here at InMobi. Before we kick things off, I'd like to just share a few house rules. So I understand that a lot of us are working from home and connectivity might be an issue. So if at any point you're not able to hear us or you think there's a bit of a lag, then I'd encourage you to log out and then log back in. We will be taking questions at the end of the session. So if at any point you find, if at any point you have a question, then please feel free to put it in the window on the right-hand side chat box, and we will take them at the end of the session. Before we kick off, I'd also like to acknowledge the impact of COVID-19 that has had on the countless lives of the people across the globe and in the region. As we continue to navigate this new reality where we're juggling between health, family, social responsibilities, and work, we understand that brands are also in the midst of a new conundrum, figuring out if and how they should respond to this crisis. Often, this begins at understanding changing consumer behavior, and we know that we could help here. Our audience intelligence platform has crunched the data for over a million unique users across Southeast Asia and thousands of points of interest. We've combined this with insights from InMobi Pulse, our mobile market research platform, to directly hear from consumers on their shifting sentiments and behavior. I'd like to now introduce you to our speakers, Rajesh Pantana and Sudhanshu Saxena. Rajesh leads the marketing strategy and end-to-end marketing initiatives for InMobi across Asia Pacific. In his previous roles at InMobi, Rajesh has led product marketing for InMobi's performance and monetization solutions and was also a part of the founder's staff in the marketing function. Sudhanshu heads the strategic partnership initiatives in APAC for InMobi. He has donned the partnership leader hat across multiple locations, both in the western and eastern part of the world. With over a decade of experience, Sudhanshu brings with him a wealth of knowledge across strategic digital partnerships, strategic sales, account management, and business development. Before I hand it over to Rajesh, I'd like to give you guys a quick overview of what we'll be discussing today. First, we'll take a look at the impact that COVID-19 has had in the region since it first came into notice in the early part of the year and how different nations have been reacting to this pandemic. We'll then deep dive into shifting consumer behavior, both from an offline and online perspective, focusing on 4 countries: Singapore, Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. We will then share how consumer perception has shifted since the onset of this pandemic, and then conclude with how brands can responsibly address these challenges. Over to you, Rajesh.
Thank you, Srishna. First up, I would like to just call out that, before we deep dive into the insights, it is actually, important that we look at the overall COVID-19 impact in Southeast Asia. Uh, and this is really important for us to look at because these kind of establish some of the correlations and some of the reasons why a certain behavior or a certain pattern has emerged in the past few weeks or so. For the purpose of the insights or trends that we are talking about, we are going to look at the trends from Jan 1st to March 23rd, and therefore you might not see a bunch of updates from the last couple of weeks. However, we will soon be releasing them over the period of this week. Now, if you look at the overall Southeast Asia and some of the top regions which have been affected by COVID-19, you see that while Singapore was probably one of the earliest nations to have seen cases or reported cases, we see that quickly Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, etc., have seen a very steep rise in cases in the past 3 to 4 weeks, and all of this has also kind of been seen immediately after the WHO has declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. And I want to reiterate that this is a very important part because once the pandemic was declared, was when a lot of testing and a lot of action was initiated, was kind of kicked off within various countries. Now, in the entire duration of the COVID-19 impact in Southeast Asia, there are a few key events that we need to keep in mind, due to which there have been significant changes or significant shifts in consumer behavior that we're seeing today. Right. So just calling out a few of them so that you guys can relate to some of the insights that we're going to share today. Uh, One of the key pieces was that way early, like in Jan last week, we saw that Singapore, Philippines were one of the earliest countries to have confirmed cases, but also it got really serious when Philippines kind of reported the first death outside of mainland China, right? And this became a big piece because until then the idea or the thought of COVID-19 being limited to China and being contained to China was what was uh, being thought of, but later on it was evident that this was something that was really spreading as far and wide as possible. Now, as mid-Feb and late Feb approached, you saw that Singapore and Philippines both really got stringent with a lot of their norms and with a lot of their rules within the nation. So, of course, there was a whole shelter-in-place kind of situation that was called for all people who had returned from China. At the same time, as we saw a peak in South Korea cases, there was a travel advisory issuing a ban across both of the countries. Now, a significant development which I called out earlier as well was on March 11th, where WHO declared coronavirus, as a pandemic. And around this time is where a lot of the other nations, such as Malaysia, Indonesia, etc., probably also kicked into an action standpoint where they started thinking about testing. They started thinking about widespread reporting of whatever cases are coming up in the countries. And then as a result of that as well is why you see a lot of the cases going up around this particular or after this particular point in time. But what got really, strict was the Singapore and Philippines governments. What we see was that people with travel history to specific countries, which included Italy, Iran, Japan, Korea, etc., denied entry or transit, and it got really strict around this time. And at the same time, in Philippines, a state of public health emergency was declared, uh, especially calling out for measures against hoarding, right? And so this basically meant that during the period of March 1 to 15, both Singapore and PH almost went into code red, sub-level 2 around this point, right? And a kind of community quarantine was called out at this point in time. Now, quickly between March 16 to 31st, we see that Singapore government at the end of the day, called out that people really need to defer all travel, be it local or international, etc., and then have had us all residents to shelter in place. And at the same time, across Philippines, Malaysia, everyone was in either strict, community quarantines or lockdowns until the end of the month, just so that they could bring the number of cases down and plateau the curve. Similarly, Indonesia also started taking steps starting March 17th, where a lot of the schools were closed, a lot of the work from home was encouraged, and entry into Indonesia was denied to people who were, coming from the affected countries. Uh, Now, only recently we've seen that there has been a lot more stringent warnings given by both the Philippines and Indonesian governments across the country by the ministries. And at the same time, it's really strange that we saw measures a bit later, but Indonesia, kind of has become the country with highest mortality rate in Southeast Asia when it comes to the number of reported cases versus the deaths with COVID-19. Um, Now, quickly moving into just the offline and online trends, how life has changed in these unprecedented times across the regions. So we tried to look at some of the top regions, which include Singapore, Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia, and try and figure out how a lot of these offline and online trends in terms of footfall and in terms of app usage have changed over the past few months. Now, in Singapore, if you see, one of the biggest pieces was all the three graphs where you see footfall across hospital visits, grocery store visits, or local bus usage. You basically see that around the time where it was called out as a pandemic, which is March 11th, you see a definite rise and a steep rise in basically the number of people going to hospital to get checked for both symptomatic and asymptomatic cases. Similarly, a lot of grocery store visits had spiked up because of the panic that had set in around this time, by calling of the pandemic, and at the same time, Singapore being the hub with a huge dependency on tourism and a lot of travel. This basically called out, for people to take precautionary measures as soon as possible. But also, as you see, around that period is where there is a drastic dip in the number of people, using the local buses, etc. Right. Um, Now, around this time, we definitely saw, a lot of people practicing the shelter in place and heeding to the government's advice. And around this time, we saw that a lot of people were focused on two or three key app categories. One, of course, was gaming. And we saw that it was not merely casual gaming. Right now, given that people had more time and they wanted to be involved or engaged in a much better manner, they were looking at arcade, strategy, and trivia games, in a way to basically engage themselves. So that is one of the big shifts that is happening, where a lot of the consumers are not just sticking to casual games; they're moving away and moving to more, hardcore and engaging games. Similarly, Singapore citizens, very different from the other Southeast Asian countries, there has been a steep rise in the finance apps, probably to monitor a lot of the fluctuating um currencies, fluctuating stock markets, etc., and also to just look at more banking and banking facilities, online banking, etc. Um, However, one of the biggest pastimes, and this is common across Southeast Asia, as you will see for the rest of the nations as well, is that photo plus video editor apps have become really famous, and become one of the most popular app categories for consumers across the region, to make sure that they are, still infusing positivity. They're still, using it to good effect and sharing or spreading the great and good vibes with their family, relatives, and near and dear ones. Now, in Philippines, a slightly different story, and just a couple of things that have led to the unique, trend here is that, in Philippines, the hospital visits kind of shot up immediately after the first case was in fact detected, and also the first death was reported. So that in fact saw a huge rise. And once the pandemic was kind of called out, we saw that, there was a consistent number of people actually visiting hospitals on a daily basis. However, it dipped once the community quarantine was called for, and that made sure that, the government was basically allaying fears. There was no panic, but only people with the key symptoms or core symptoms, identifiable symptoms, were therefore being tested and made sure that they were being called out. Very similar trend when it comes to supermarkets. It immediately dipped around the point when, you saw that the first death was reported, and also the point, since the quarantine came in, uh, it has kind of streamlined, in the sense that the number of supermarket visits has been kind of reduced, wherein the government is ensuring that people go at specified times, and at the same time, um, it is also enabling more e-commerce or more, in-store visits, and this is largely representative of just the metros. So it is not the entire Philippines per se. Philippines, however, has seen very similar in terms of gaming. Now, here, slightly different is that it's more trivia games than arcade or strategy games. But yeah, so trivia and casual gaming are what are driving a lot of the growth in gaming here. But the other two pastimes, messaging apps, photo plus video apps, definitely are something that have shot up, where everybody is trying to, ward away the uh, grim or dark vibes around them. Also making sure that they are spending that much more time being in touch with their loved ones. But however, music is probably serving as the biggest relief, stress relief mechanism for Filipinos today. Um, Now, in Malaysia, we actually see that it is one of the countries which has, the steepest rise and is now ranking as the country which has the highest number of cases, reported cases within the Southeast Asia. What we did see was, in fact, uh, and this was slightly later than when WHO had called out the pandemic. We saw a 20% dip in visits to restaurants, movie theaters, and shopping malls as the entire social distancing became a norm, and people wanted to make sure that they avoided contact and public spaces as much as possible. Uh, but definitely, the panic was at the highest, I think, in Malaysia, um, wherein we saw a 410% jump in hospital visits and a 148% increase in visits to supermarkets, grocery, and convenience stores, as hoarding behavior had set in really high in the country. Uh, and while the app usage pattern kind of remains very similar or derived from Singapore, its nearest neighbor, but what we also saw was that Malaysians were taking to book and comic apps. And they were basically taking to this more than anything else to spend their time and to basically make sure that they were, relieving the stress during these dark times. Uh, Indonesia, one of the unique things that we see is, of course, a delayed response to the entire situation. But one of the heartening things that we could basically see with the restaurants visits dipped way early, way before the government regulations came into place, the government advisories came into place. So definitely, a lot of people took the precautionary measure to basically avoid public spaces such as restaurants, and at the same time, there was a lot of initiative that was taken even by the local super apps or the local hyper local delivery players such as Grab and Gojek to ensure that the restaurants could actually still continue to serve consumers, and while consumers were still maintaining the social distance norm, and they were actually adhering to or they were still staying safe at that point in time. And you still see that the trend is only going downward. uh, at the same time, we saw that the Jakarta airport visits, while it took a bit of time until the government kind of stepped in and stopped people who are coming to Indonesia or Jakarta from affected countries. Until then, we saw that there was, a kind of exodus of sorts of people going back to their nations wherever possible. But after that, we saw a steady dip in the Jakarta airport visits. Now, Indonesia, I think what uniquely was also seen was that, gaming apps, of course, I think have been a phenomenon across the entire Southeast Asia, wherein people are seeing a lot of respite, a lot of relief by engaging themselves and taking that as an avocation in these tough times. But also, what Indonesians are taking to is a lot of productivity apps, and especially travel plus tracking apps, because of the entire Ramadan season coming up, and a lot of Mudik travelers were really, troubled about their plans, what will happen, the uncertainty, etc. And so there was a lot of tracking that they were doing regarding government advisories, the availability of or continuity of services of these uh, airplanes, etc., was something that they were definitely trying to track, and that has basically kind of, I think, plateaued or subsided now, as there is a region wide and probably a global uh, you know lockdown at the end of the day due to this particular uh, piece. Now, moving forward, what we also tried to do was to look at, specifically Indonesia as a region, and try and understand what was the evolving consumer sentiment and behavior. Sudhanshu, if you could just share a bit about how did we go about this particular survey, and what is InMobi Pulse? How has it helped us?
Sure, Rajesh. Hi, very good morning to everyone. Thanks for your time. So, InMobi Pearls, as the name suggests, is InMobi's own mobile research platform, which is built on top of InMobi's tech stack. What it does is it enables brands to quickly conduct market research. While doing that, you can do it at really large scale. So, almost say four out of five smartphone users in Southeast Asia would be reachable by this platform, and you can do so by directly reaching out to a specific curated set of target audiences on mobile apps, because InMobi only deals with mobile apps. We are an in-app platform, and efficiently collect verified user responses. So as I mentioned earlier, it's all the goodness of InMobi's edtech platform, be it reaching out to a specific curated set of audiences or reaching out to a specific audience set at a very large scale. All of that goodness also is present in InMobi Pearls. These times are tough. These are unprecedented times. We understand the sources or resources to conduct market research at this point in time. When consumer behavior is changing very rapidly and is going to change for good, there are only a limited set of sources you'll have to understand the pulse or the nerve of the consumer. That's where some of the differentiator, like large scale reach, quick turnaround time. For example, in this slide, you see we almost surveyed 1,056 plus consumers. All of this was done in just a matter of few days. You can target a very curated set of consumer, do that at scale. There's very high productivity and authentic response because it works on a pull-based mechanism, and hence there's very less user fatigue. There's a lot of user buy-in in that, and a lot of authenticity that we can also bring in by understanding via AI and ML whether the responses are coming in the right spirit or no. Just looking at the survey, as I mentioned earlier, we looked at almost 1,000 plus respondents in Indonesia. Demographic-wise, we had 60% males and 40% females. In terms of what sort of age group they belong to, majority of it, almost two-thirds, was Gen Z, which is 24 year and below, and 17% was millennials, 25 to 34, while rest were baby boomers, 35 and above. We surveyed, responded across Indonesia, so all tier 1, tier 2, and beyond cities were covered, so Jakarta, Surabaya, Bandung, and so on and so forth. There's a laundry list of cities that we covered for this. So you have a very fair, very strong representation of all parts of Indonesia covered in this survey. And marital status and family structure wise, almost two-thirds, almost three-fourths actually, were single, while the rest were married. Majority of them, 44%, were living in joint families and 43 were in nuclear, while the rest were living with friends or they were living alone. So this was the sort of profile of survey respondents that we have. Over to you, Rajesh, to take us through the insights that we gathered.
Thank you, Sudhanshu. So if you guys see, the first piece that we really wanted to look at was the consumer sentiment in terms of awareness, understanding, and the expectation that they were having with, say, governments. So they were having with, just the how this whole situation will pan out. One of the key things that I think everybody needs to notice, be it governments, non-profits, brands like you and I, is that 85% of the respondents were unsure of COVID-19 sources, where a lot of them, kind of cited this as a bio war between China and the USA. A lot of it called out this as, the main reason being some kind of, a bio weaponry that was being shielded in Shanghai, etc. So this is, really disturbing, because a lot of misinformation is, abound. And we also see, like earlier, I had shared a bit with you about how messaging and communication apps, seeing a lot of usage, a lot of surge, but that can also be detrimental, as people are probably sharing a lot of things which are not, true, or which are not really right. So I think that's one of the biggest pieces. In terms of just understanding the gravity of the situation, or just understanding the disease in itself, we saw that only 9% understand and identify symptoms. And that's the issue that I think every brand today needs to really tackle head on and reach the consumers across the board to make sure that they are informed as much as possible. Um, while we saw that it is definitely heartening that 66% are practicing social distancing, what we need in these extreme times is high restraint and exercising caution. And what we see that 34% of the Indonesian respondents are still not practicing social distancing. And this has definitely got to go away. But also at the end of the day, 85% were not able to identify all preventive measures. Now, this is really, really, something that I think over the next, few weeks, we will be doing a survey again, and we would want to make sure that we do keep a close watch on how the levels are changing, week on week. Now, with regards to the expectation piece, where I was talking about, how satisfied are they with government, or how do they see this whole thing panning out? One of the pieces that we've seen is that 70% believe mortality rate will be greater than 6% because of COVID-19, um, right? And while we see that people really do not, are either not following or do not understand the disease that well, the the panic or the fear is definitely very high among the same set of respondents. So there is a definite bridge which can be kind of that can be built by brands out here. And that's where, given this whole fear where they're believing that the world economy is in trouble, and the situation is going to last over a month, we see that they're not really satisfied with the government measures. There's only 13% who have said that they're very satisfied with government measures today. Now, in terms of the challenges that people are facing and how that has impacted essentials and lifestyle, we definitely saw that 41%, which is definitely a huge number, um, found a scarcity of sanitizers and hand wash, right? And it is actually very heartening to see that only very limited people, for 14% of them, found a scarcity of food essentials. And I think this is largely to do with, both the government and the super apps or the brands, local hyper local delivery players who are ensuring that they are continuing services under strict safety measures, right? And even though it was late, probably just making sure that they did this in the nick of time is making sure that there is no scarcity of food essentials. Um, and what this has also changed in terms of lifestyle is that there is limited eating out or ordering in, right? So people are definitely, if they're not able to, they're definitely ordering in. But a majority of them are now, taking to cooking at home, trying to eat more home cooked food, etc. In times of the COVID. One of the other pieces that we saw in terms of just shopping preferences and spends in a certain category was that the hoarding behavior definitely has set in, but only 23% of the respondents, or one fourth of the respondents, have said that they have had the need to hoard up on essentials, or they're actually going ahead and doing it. And this is quite in line with the fact that a lot of people were really fine, and they found that there was no dearth of food essentials. So I think that is definitely in line. But what is a very big change is that two-thirds or three-fourths of the community is basically increasing or decreasing spends based on whatever they are seeing as relevant, or wherever they see a few categories making sense and spending on that making sense. But one of the most important pieces has been that in categories which include food, which include personal care such as soaps, hand wash, sanitizers, etc. What we've seen is that everybody is choosing quality over price and over brand. Brand was a distant fourth, in fact, in this particular response. And 80% said right now they're just looking at quality, and they're looking at the better ways that brands are communicating that, and if they are getting all the information when they are going shopping right there at the aisle, or if they're doing it online. Now, this definitely, is a strange situation. It's definitely unprecedented, and being very different from the, last four downturns that we've seen. This is probably the grimmest of them all, and it's very, very different. Now, how do brands navigate this new reality? How can brands respond? And some of you may ask, should we even respond, right? And what you actually see today is that events are getting cancelled. The Mobile World Congress was something that just shut shop immediately as soon as the first case was reported. In fact, um, and there is a lot of transformation that we are seeing in TV programming and advertising. This is specifically in the US. In India, in fact, we are seeing a lot of OTT usage going up. In Southeast Asia, like we mentioned today, a lot of gaming, right, and messaging and communication apps are going up. But there's a lot of confusion out there, right? So some are seeing a downside, some are seeing an upside. And around this time, this is how consumers are probably feeling, right? Where brands are, reaching out to them 3 or 4 years ago, and really want to know if they are, doing fine, and that they are making sure that they are here for consumers in this difficult time. Sudhanshu, I believe you had a similar experience, right? And around this time, would be great if you could share, having worked with a lot of these big brands, big companies, help navigate some of the similar, issues in the past. Would really love to hear from you and leverage your expertise in this particular space.
Sure, Rajesh, my pleasure. You're right. Regarding this tune, I did had a personal experience. So here's this brand. It deals with. I'm talking about the tune that you see on the right bottom side of the screen. Now the lady here is saying, "Hey, look, this brand was not in touch with me last 3 4 years, and suddenly this brand has got in touch with me. So this, what is this fuss about?" It happened to me. There's this brand which is dealing with me, which was dealing with newborns and infant in that sort of a category. My son is now 4 year old. So a few years back, of course, 3 4 years back, I was buying some stuff from these guys when he was 6 months old. For another year or so, year and a half, they were still reaching out to me via their CRM tools, trying to figure out what they can upsell or cross sell to me. And then it sort of fizzled out because they were dealing with more of a newborn and infant pet. Now they reached out to me last week, just asking how we are doing. How are you, sir? How is your family doing? Here are certain tips that you can have while you're staying at home, because they thought I'm in India right now, which is going through lockdown. So here are the tips through which you can make this time which you're having at home with your kids more meaningful. Here are the list of activities that you can do with your kids. So as Rajesh was pointing out, gone are the days where you can just put out your brand out there and say, "Hey, look, here is my brand. Here are the different features or benefits of the product and services that I offer. Here is how you can avail them." Gone are those days. Now it has to be purpose-led brand communication. At the same time, while we all understand there's a lot of confusion because there's a lot of uncertainty because it's an unprecedented time, but should I stop? No, you should not. Let me quote here a survey that was done by Kantar not so long ago, actually, towards the end of March. And Kantar surveyed almost 35,000 consumers, and 78% of the consumer believe that brand should be able to help in their daily lives. Only 8% of the consumers said that their brand should stop advertising or marketing. That means a phenomenal 92%, more than 90% of the consumers still wanted brands to advertise. However, the times have changed. The expectation of consumers have also changed. As I mentioned, 78% of the consumer believe that brand should help in their daily lives during this time. Similar amount of people thought that the brand should be able to inform on what they're doing in terms of what sort of measures those brands are taking in these difficult times. Similar amount of people, three-quarter, thought that companies should not exploit the situation, right? So there's a fine line between irritation and information. So you should not be irritating the consumer while you're taking out your information piece to the consumer. So it's very important that your communication is purpose-led, right? Now, here are three approaches that we have just put in across: long-term, mental brand equity, CSR, PSA initiative, etc. Now, let us look at these one by one. What do actually each of these mean? So what does this long-term approach mean? It basically means that while you're taking measures, you should not look insensitive or creepy or opportunistic. Remember, in Kantar panel, almost three-quarters of consumers said that you should not exploit the situation. Any of us remember the tagline of KFC, which says, it's finger licking good? While it was, of course, not intentional, but finger licking good at the times when there's a lot of focus on personal hygiene didn't resonate with consumers a lot. There's a lot of backlash in UK to start with, then it spread across other countries as well. Coors Light, a beer brand, they call themselves as official work from home beer. That was quite insensitive as the consumer thought, and there was a lot of backlash. So make sure that you're not becoming insensitive when you're taking your message, your communication out to respective brands. What about building mental brand equity? So basically, how can you leverage your owned, earned, and paid media? You can do emailers, you can utilize your CRM to provide valuable information. To inform consumers about certain features in your product that you're launching. The example that I gave about this baby brand, which was an infant brand, reaching out to me, not selling any product. They were just giving a piece of information. Hey, look, these are the kind of activities that you can, sort of do in this time when you're locked in your home with your family and your kid is young. So here are the things that you can sort of enjoy with your family. So how can you build mental brand equity? It's very important to do that. At the same time, how can you engage in CSR or PSA initiatives that can really, really make a difference? So spreading awareness about safety measures, best practices, fighting misinformation. There's a lot of information. There's an information overload across us. WhatsApp, all the sites, news channels, Facebook, wherever you go, there's a lot of misinformation as well, along with some very, very valuable information. So how do you make sure as a brand you play your part in segregating this misinformation from the information that consumers really need? This was done, say, for example, by Unilever beautifully. In January, and they launched an ad back in India, which was about washing hands. They, in fact, ended up naming their competition into it. So this was an easy guide sort of a thing that they started talking about in terms of what sort of precautions you should take when it comes to personal hygiene against coronavirus. So it was about washing hands, and they went on to say it doesn't necessarily have to be Lifebuoy. It can be Lux. Now Lux is another Unilever brand, but it can also be Dettol, which is a Racket Bekaise brand, or a Santoor, which is a Wipro brand, or Godrej #1. They were very clear that it doesn't have to be Lifebuoy, but make sure that please you're washing hands. So great initiative, very well done by Lifebuoy there. So these are certain things that you have to make sure that your communication that is going out from brands to consumer is purpose-led, right? As we move on to the next slide, now as this happens, right, as I said earlier, there's a difference between information and irritation, right? So you also have to be really, really creative about how you are taking your messaging out there. So I read somewhere that there's a nice analogy that was driven that everybody is being respectful of giving spaces in public as you go around walking in public, walking around each other, but not causing others any concern. And that's the kind of creativity, that's the sort of thought process brands should also bring in when it comes to their creative innovation. And it is not going to come easy. It's not definitely easy for sure. For some brands, maybe for a lot of brands, it's not going to come easy. So a lot of thinking has to give in. So what we have tried to give in is certain checks that you can have. For example, the content, the messaging, the communication that you're taking out to your brand, is this appropriate during this time? While KFC had their tagline for years, it was definitely not appropriate for this time, right? Is this going to upset people? What Moonlight did, for example, by going out and talking about themselves being the official beer for the work from home people, definitely upsetted people. They were trying to exploit the situation. They were being opportunistic at this point in time. May not be too intentional, but they ended up doing that. And most importantly, is this going to address a core concern of the consumer, or is this driving in a certain sentiment that has to be driven at this point in time? And we understand Netflix does these things quite beautifully. So let's just try and play this. I'm sure a few of you have already seen this, but it's just a 30-second there. So why don't we just play it? I think there's no sound, but there's a visual. So basically, what they were saying was stay at home. And oh, there you go.
Damn, your signals crossed. Got my cake to frost. Misinterpretate me, damn, I got shit to do. Get my signals crossed. Got my cake to frost. Misinterpretate me, damn, I got things to do.
Yeah, so the message that they were driving was not about the new launch show or the new movie that is now available on Netflix, but it was about stay at home. Now, as we move on to the next one, we're talking about leveraging owned and earned media to stay connected. Now, there are a lot of brands which are quite essential in our consumers' life. For example, productivity apps, e-commerce. Now, these are going to play a very, very important role in our lives during these tough times, right? So these categories are essentials: healthcare, personal care, communication, communicative tool like collaborative tool or productivity, HubSpot, Microsoft tools, and so on and so forth. There's an extra responsibility on these brands. The responsibility is that it's their prerogative to stay connected with consumers in slightly different manner. And first and foremost, they got to do this via their own and earned media. For example, what Lazada did the left-hand example that you're seeing here, they called in medical experts to provide advice. While Lazada is not known for doing so, there are a lot of other companies who do so. That's their core job. Lazada's core competency is e-commerce. They did so that they're able to set a chord with consumers. And again, remember in the Kanta survey, what consumers said: you should be able to help me with my daily lives. Now, this connects that part really well. The second example right in the middle is via HubSpot. So a lot of premium features were provided free of cost. They made it free on a lot of productivity apps or features that were there in HubSpot Suite were free. The similar stuff was done by Microsoft as well on the right-hand side. In fact, Satya came out, did a short video and spread it across LinkedIn, saying that a lot of those features will be made available. Their engineers are working to make sure that during the heavy traffic timing also things are running smoothly. So it's important that we're able to ensure that your message has some of these features. Number one, personalization or customization whenever possible. So make sure that you're able to curate your message in a way that it suits the needs of the consumer in these times. You have to have sensitivity. Number two, have to have sensitivity-led communication addressing a core concern of the consumer, right, that you're trying to elevate. The third and important one is demonstrate the actions that you're taking to elevate a pain and enhance the life of the consumer in these times. For example, Lazada example. It's such a great example that you are trying to address the medical uncertainties that are there at this point in time. There are a lot of false information, lies that are spreading across. Here you can get the right answers from medical expert right away. The fourth one is driving a visual communication through image that could also help you out, because consumer at this point in time, and to be honest, across all times, relate to images, videos, GIFs, something that is a little more engaging, a lot better. Now, moving forward, what do we have next is providing reassurance in the times of uncertainty. This is also very, very important. Now, there are certain brands which are highly essentials to consumers' life. All of us who are living in Singapore would remember last Friday when PM Lee was about to come and have a, he was to speak at 4 p.m. and suddenly we saw during early afternoon time, people were going to retail stores, and there was huge queue, long queues, and that's exactly when FairPrice CEO Mr. Peng came out and said, hey, look, whatever happens, our stores will be open. We will make sure that the supply chain is in place to ensure the increase in demand is being catered to by FairPrice. We will make sure that the staff health has been taken care of, and we'll do all the measures that the government has prescribed for us in terms of social distancing and so on and so forth, but we will be open. That's very reassuring. That came out at a very right time. Some of us who are using Grab app, now if you open your Grab app, you would see transport is not the first bit that comes up when you open your Grab app. It's now food services, more essential services, food services, or say, for example, Mart, which is a delivery service, which have taken precedence. They're also talking about the measures that they're taking to make sure there are enough drivers on the road, and how they're taking care of the health of their driver partners or delivery partners. They're also helping the community. So they are subsidizing, they're putting up special driver partners out there via GrabCare to make sure the frontline health workers are being treated at priority and at subsidized rate. Now that is again very reassuring. So here is a brand which is coming out, helping going out of hand and helping the section of community that needs it slightly more than the rest. Then there are other brands like Zomato is a global brand. Then brands like Deliveroo, who are also making sure that when it comes to safety of the way they operate their business has not been compromised. There's an option of delivery without any contact, and Zomato enabled it. Deliveroo has enabled it, and they've gone out talking about those bets in their own and operated media as well. As we move to the next slide, we also have an example from Cure.fit, which did similar thing. Now, Cure.fit is an Indian brand which is more into fitness. So they have gyms, about fitness trainers. They also have a food services, which again, delivers healthy food to consumers. Now, what they did here was during this unprecedented times, some of us would be able to find solace in adapting to a new hobby like staying fit, exercising. It's very difficult for others, right? It's not a cup of tea for everyone. So some would would want to have some sort of a consultancy with done with certain psychologists because they're staying home. It's not how they have been programmed for years or decades. So they need some consultation. So those consultations were provided by Cure.fit. There are a lot of other things like book your appointment. You can do a simple online test and so on and so forth. So brand went outside of their core comfort areas and started talking about services which are in line with their customers' interest. Moving further, we have an example of Prudential, right? So these are some examples that we have seen in last few slides on how some of these brands have actually done really well during these difficult times. At the same time, when there was a lot of confusion in the minds of brands on how to approach, right? Here is the insurance brand. Of course, insurance is one vertical that has seen a lot of spike, and a lot of insurance companies are struggling to make sure that they're able to cater to the amount of requests that are coming in from customers. Now, this particular insurance company, Prudential in this case in Hong Kong, said for the first 300,000 customers, as long as you are adult and identity card holder who is aged above 18, they will do a free COVID-19 protection. So they'll provide insurance for those people. Of course, when this settles down, and it will hopefully sooner than later, the first brand that will remain in the community's mind when it comes to insurance will be Prudential. So the way they've gone about making sure that their consumers are being taken care of has been phenomenal. Here are some more examples on how some other successful brands have very successfully able to leverage digital channels to spread the words. Now, Netflix, we all know, is a very funny and quirky brand. So what they did was they actually used a site which can create an image like this using lyrics of your favorite song. So they used On a Roll from Ashley, which the first line says, "Oh honey, I'll do anything for you," and how you can wash hands for 20 seconds while humming that song, right? So very, very nice way of putting it out. You do have an instant connection with things like this. And we know Netflix does things like this. IKEA, they came with shelter in place. How do you stay at home? So, and here are the instructions. Very simple one, probably the simplest instruction that IKEA has ever printed out. All you need is one key, one lock, and make sure that it's locked, and 100 tissues, toilet tissues. The best way is that your door is locked, and it's not right if your door is open and you're coming back and forth. So please stay home. Maybank had been talking about it's safer at home. Why don't you bank online? Now, on the right-hand side, we see social distancing, right? A very, very important measure that every government in the world, every health authority in the world is talking about. Make sure that you stay home, stay in isolation. If you have to go out for doing some essential things or essential services, make sure you're observing social distancing seriously with all the discipline that you can, right? At the same time, we all know how brands are finicky about their logos. At times, they will go crazy if all the branding guidelines, the way the logo should appear, is not properly, adhered to. But here we see Volkswagen Group, two companies from Volkswagen Group, the Volkswagen itself and Audi came out and did an innovative, creative way to talk about social distancing while showcasing the same in their logo. So very innovative ways that came out. Now, CSR activities, right? So utilizing digital channels, and how do you do that? I talked about example and how Unilever Lifebuoy did that really, really well. And here, at times, you can also go out of your comfort zone. Now, here, uh, what these companies are doing, let me take the first example. So the first is Moonlight Beer. Let's just try and play it out. So basically what they're doing is, okay, yeah. What they're doing is they're a beer brand. Of course, they're served in pubs and bars, which are closed right now because there's a lockdown, social distancing is being observed. Now that is hitting on the people who serve in these restaurants or pubs, right? So their livelihood is gone. Now they have created a virtual tip jar in which they're asking their customers to donate money, and they will donate from their own side as well. Similarly, Spotify has a COVID relief fund, music relief fund for a certain community of musicians. Now, both of these brands, in their own unique ways, are catering to a certain section of societies, and it is also important to note that these section of societies resonate really, really well with their core TG. In Spotify's case, musician. In this case, the people who serve. You when you go to a pub or restaurant. Similarly, the example in red, which is a carousel example, will you choose to give? Now, each of these brands, in fact, on the right hand side is Western Union. They're saying, hey, look, behind every mask there's a heart. So they are asking for donation, which in turn will be given to certain NGOs. Now, none of these brands is talking about the core business that they have, but they're touching upon in their own innovative, creative ways, the essence of what their brand is all about, which is really, really phenomenal to see. Now, here is how some of the brands that we have been working with have done so in the very, very recent past. On the left-hand side, again, it's a government, Victoria, from Australia, who was talking about how you should limit your indoor gathering and make sure that very less people go out. In the middle, you see a dynamic ad from Lifebuoy, which basically picks up different diseases that are happening in different parts of Indonesia via Hello Doctor app. And looking at the temperature, we serve very different ads, dynamic ads across different parts of Indonesia. On the right-hand side, this is around the fire safety that became a big issue in Australia not so long ago. So this is how some of these brands have sort of utilized.
Thanks a lot for sharing some of the examples from the industry and what leading brands are doing. But could you distill this into a framework and help our listeners here today to think about this in a more structured manner?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So I think next slide that we're going to talk about does touch upon that very, very strongly. So I think we did touch upon the fact that the times are changing, and with the times, what is changing is consumers' behaviors. Their sentiments are also changing. They're changing drastically for certain verticals, not so drastically for others. But they're changing for good. Some of the habits that we will form during this time will remain with us for a very, very long time. That's consideration number one. Consideration number two is, again, we talked about this earlier, the sources or resources that you have in order to understand the pulse or the nerve of those consumers are fairly, fairly limited. Social distancing has to be observed. You can't have those offline surveys of taking people out and having a lot of survey responses filled. That is not possible. So at the same time, so what you need to do is figure out platforms who can still make you reach out to those consumers whose behaviors are changing or who form your core TG, and make sure that you're able to investigate the real insights that are coming out in these ever-changing times. So these insights will give you, some stuff that you've probably not expected from your consumers if it was a usual time. Then what this will lead into is a refreshed segmentation of your core TG. There could be new TG which will get added, or new dimensions of the existing TG that will appear. So it's very important that you're also able to refresh your segmentation. And of course, there could be multiple innovative ways so you can reach out to those consumers and figure out, again, it's not going to be easy. So you have to be really creative. You have to be really, or you need to make sure that you're figuring out new ways, new innovative ways to touch that chord with consumers, basis the intelligence that you've gone from investigation and segmentation. So we would suggest investigate, segment, innovate as a new way. Also, we talked about the fact that consumer sentiments are changing. It is very, very important to understand consumer behavior. So let me take an example of how mixed brand is observing a new behavior that we're working with. So of course, a lot of males are now staying home. They're also participating in a lot of household activities, especially cooking dinner. And now, of course, some of them, not all of them maybe, are very good cooks or chefs. So they're looking out for something easy that they can use. So the insight that we have, a new behavior which is emerging, is that males are getting into, household, chores. They want to, spend time with family in the activities that matter to the family. What is motivating this new behavior is the signs that, there's a lockdown, so you've got to stay at home. What sort of messaging or communication you would want to take to this new TG is something that you can always work upon. So make sure that you're able to, I'm not going to go into the details of each of these because it'll take me 10-15 minutes to explain all of these, but I think I'm able to explain the essence of how a new TG is probably getting formed somewhere, what motivations that TG has, what sort of communication you are able to take to those TGs that are getting formed. You'll only be able to do it if you're able to do a short mobile survey, because mobile is one medium that is seeing huge amount of spike. Rajesh talked about some of the content consumption patterns. These are 400-500% more than what it used to be in usual time. Moving further, of course, yes, there's a survey that you could also complement those insights or claimed intelligence that is coming in from those consumers. On top of that, you can put epigraphic data. Rajesh did delve into the details of some of those for certain countries. You can reach out to us if you need to have more details around it. But you can understand top app usage, which are the new trends that are emerging from content consumption patterns. Like gaming is a new premium, and it's prevalent across age and gender. Location visitation patterns, so increase or decrease visits to a certain key places. So you can figure out what are the point of interest I should keep in mind, what are the point of interest I should forget about. So all of this data is also possible along with along with mobile, that you can put on top of intelligence that you've gathered from surveys. And this one more bit, so you should be able to build curated content. The content that you were promoting earlier, the communication that you were taking earlier is changing now. Why is it changing? Because consumer sentiments are changing, the times are changing, the circumstances have changed. So curate content that help customers with required information. There's a very fine line again between information and irritation, and you want to make sure that you're on the information side of things, right? So provide updates and enhance their daily lives. Again, going back to Kanta, do not exploit the situation. Provide updates which are relevant to consumer. Infuse positivity as well, right? Again, going back to the point, do not exploit the situation. How can you infuse positivity? Some of the brands like CureFit we talked about, some of the brands like Moonlight or what Spotify was doing, they were trying to do something positive for the society. So that is also very important. In terms of medium, we know mobile amongst the connected devices, including TVs, is the device that consumers are really looking forward to and consuming most of their content from. So mobile is one of those mediums that a lot of brands are already leveraging massively, and that is something that you should keep in mind also as you plan your overall media strategy. And I think a lot of advisories are also coming from different global marketing and advertising guidelines. Like WHO has come out. They've talked about certain do's and don'ts. They want to address certain, certain bits that they want to spread across the globe, like personal sanitization, social distancing, hand washing, and so on and so on and so forth. Indian and UK government have talked about the do's and don'ts of advertising during these times. Again, the essence of it is do not exploit the situation. Be sensitive to the consumers. Try and help consumers right now at this point in time. They could be helped via directly your service or may not be helped via directly your service. So figure out different ways on how you can sort of be innovative around it. Rajesh, do you want to add something on top of this as well?
Yeah, Sudhanshu. So quickly, I'll just like to share, what InMobi is doing and how we are walking the talk as well. So first up, we have actually, gone ahead and we're pledging $dollar credits for brands that continue to push CSR or PSA advertisements during COVID-19. What we've also done is we've partnered with the entire ad tech ecosystem itself to advertise and promote information from WHO or UNICEF, right, and have them be the beneficiaries of the filling of ad spaces that we are doing during these times. And we are doing this across the globe, including some of the most affected places, such as the United States and especially in Asia Pacific, right? And what we've also done is, like you've seen, the Victorian government working with us. We're trying to make sure that we're helping regional governments spread the word, either by leveraging, our mobile advertising platform, or basically, partnering with government bodies for CSR activities wherever possible. And if you guys are thinking about, or you, as a marketer or brand, are really thinking about how you can either put your brand when it is very relevant, out there, letting people know, providing them information, ensuring continuity, providing reassurance, etc. Or if you feel that you are not relevant but you really want to contribute and look to build mental brand equity and take a long-term approach during this time, how do you go about all of this? So we do have a bunch of creative consultants at our end who and you've seen some of those examples, like the creative that we built for Victorian government, the location-based creative that we built for Lifebuoy in Indonesia, where it was a region-based creative where, say, a particular disease such as jaundice was in the rise or cholera was in rise, etc., right? And showed different preventive measures, different safety measures accordingly. So we do have a creative team that can definitely go ahead and help you pro bono on this whole piece. Just make sure that you guys are getting all the help that is required to push out and share more and more information with consumers out there today. So feel free to reach out to mobilemarketing@inmobi.com or fight COVID-19 at inmobi.com, and we will get back to you at the earliest. At this point, I think we might have a few questions, Krishna, if you could share them. I think between Sudhanshu and I, we would love to, share some of the answers to that.
Sure, sure. So yeah, thanks so much, guys. Both Rajesh and Swanshu. I think it's been really cool. I just want to share a couple of questions. I think the first question is actually regarding the impact that the fintech slash banking space that what are they probably going to see? I had about 3 or 4 people ask this very question. So if you guys could share some insights on that particular industry or vertical, in terms of what sort of impact they're seeing and how consumer behavior might be shifting because of, given the context of this pandemic.
So I think there are multiple things that are impacting the whole fintech industry. I think if you look at insurance within this, a lot of insurance companies are in fact coming to us at this point in time and trying to figure out how do they make sure that the spike in demand that is coming in is regulated in a sense that consumers are not just able to are not just panicking and trying to buy insurance, for example. There's a good amount of understanding that they have about various products and various schemes that these insurance companies have. They have the proper understanding and thorough knowledge of each of those products, and then only they're able to take the decisions. And in fact, we are working with a couple of insurance companies in trying to take this message out to the society large, saying that do not panic when it comes to insurance, the kind of insurance that you're picking up. In fact, do look at some of the alternatives where we are also able to consult you on what sort of right packages will fit you much better. Now, coming to other sectors within fintech, of course, there is a decline in other fintech industries, like banking is anyways going down big time. Core, if you look at core of, I was talking more about the BFSI as a whole. The core fintech is also showing, a lot of signals which are not really very conducive to some of these companies. I think one major impact that the coronavirus pandemic has had is the working environment, and with companies being forced to rethink the way they work and implement remote working and all this stuff, and that in turn is also affecting some of these organizations in the way some of the products were being created, how the tech capabilities and digital adoptions were being renovated or refreshed for this time, or the kind of spike that some of these products are seeing seeing in certain use cases, while decline they're seeing in certain other use cases. All of that is not coming in at the right point in time. These are some of the things that I have observed recently. Some more things that you may want to add, Rajesh, on top?
No, I think largely in terms of leveraging digital responsibly, I think one of the big pieces definitely has been the ask from consumers uh, to just stay in touch with their customers, right, and share how they're adopting or how they're ensuring business continuity. That's the first piece, and apart from that, also just providing information as much as possible. Either through earned media or taking that extra step to use paid media to basically just reach these consumers and let them know that today there are far more features, or there are far more services that have been enabled, so that you can rest assured, be it about the trading, be it about your payments, be it about your existing accounts, etc. How do you ensure that you continue to invest, or you continue to basically transact without any issues, is something that definitely BFSI sector is taking to and should definitely take to.
Yeah, I think the usual banking sector will see its decline. A lot of that movement will happen towards fintech, and consumers will increasingly go towards digital banking services, and that will end up forcing traditional financial institutions also to sort of look into driving those digital innovation efforts. So I'll see this also impacting the way a lot of these traditional institutions were also thinking about to go about their businesses. This is one side impact that I see, that I just wanted to elaborate on.
Sure.
Yeah, can we look at the other questions, Sushna?
Yeah, so this, I'm actually going to the next question. I'm just going to combine two into one. So you guys will have to be patient with me. But basically, we have one question regarding if, consumer behavior is really going to be changing. And how long do you think this impact, this, post-COVID impact, how long do you think that, should this be a short-term adjustment that folks are going to be making, or brands have to make, or will it be a little more long-term? And maybe another question in similar veins is basically if we are going to be InMobi is going to be running another survey after COVID-19 to see how impact has really been. So I think maybe Rajesh, you could probably answer this one.
Yeah, sure. I'll just quickly take this up. So, in terms of the duration of the impact, if you have been following updates, if you've been following the news, we see that a lot of the events, right? For instance, the Olympics have been postponed by close to a year, and even recently, Cannes, the overall festival itself, has been postponed to July of next year, right? And so I think this is definitely not a very short-term impact. It's going to be slightly near-term or medium-term in that sense. And then I think brands will see that there is, like Sudhanshu mentioned earlier, there is an emergence of some very new behaviors and very distinct behaviors that could probably become the new norm, right? And hopefully these are for the good and not something that's overall detrimental. But during these times, what we're at least trying to do is that we've also observed that things are changing really fast, right? And I'm sure there have been changes within the last 2 weeks itself that we have seen in terms of behavior. That could be about preferences, that could be about spends, that could be about lifestyle, etc. And so we will continue to do some of these consumer surveys over a 2 to 3 week period time at these particular intervals, and keep publishing these results across regions, and specifically for Indonesia, because we are seeing a very very steep or very drastic shift in behavior over there. So all of you, whoever has registered or has attended the webinar, will definitely share across the entire Southeast Asia trends and Indonesia trends report as and when we have new ones coming along.
Yeah.
Great. The next question, I'm just going to rush through some of these now in the interest of time. The travel or tracking app in Indonesia shows an increased level of activity, right? So I think the question here is that would we be able to actually dive a little deeper into the supporting data and what is it really trying to indicate. So if you could share a little bit about that as well, as to why is it that we're seeing such a high amount of activity on travel apps in Indonesia?
Sure. So quickly, I'll just try to wrap this up. So a couple of hypotheses that we had over there. The first one was basically the fact that there was a very short-term lot of business travel involved, especially given Jakarta is a very big hub across Southeast Asia as well. So there were a lot of these OTA apps plus a lot of the travel tracking apps, which kind of give you the status flight. Status of the flights in the next week or so. So all of these were basically seeing a huge uptake in the very short period of that week, 2 weeks. So that was definitely one of the big hypotheses. The other was also about a lot of cancellations, refunds, especially for the Ramadan season, where a lot of guys had kind of were looking to plan, or at least either had already booked or were looking to book their Mudik travel in advance. And given that now the government has kind of called it off and has asked people to exercise restraint this year, that was something that had could have probably led to a lot of increase in the travel app usage around that time.
Great. Thanks so much, Rajesh. I think we do have a bunch of other questions, but what we'll do is we will actually individually reach out to all of you and, respond to you guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know that, these are extremely difficult times and we're all trying to navigate this together, especially our industry is one that is in a sort of a delicate position. So I just want to thank you all for joining us. I want to also thank Rajesh and Sudhanshu for their time today. And we will be sharing a recording of this session as well as the insights. And of course, if you have any questions, as always, reach out to us at mobilemarketing@inmobi.com. Or I think my email ID is in the webinar invite. So you guys can also just respond to me over there and I will make sure that your questions are answered. Thanks, everyone.